need of being hopeful. Number two, if you have a leader who makes you hopeful, excited about the future, enthusiastic about the future, you are way more likely to be engaged at work. You double your chances of being engaged at work. So that's one benefit of hopeful thinking. Another benefit of hopeful thinking is that you show up. You show up at work. Okay, so all of you did that today. All of you did that for this session. But that doesn't necessarily happen every day. We did a study of engineers at an aeronautical group, and what we found is that the hopeful engineers were more likely to go to work than the less hopeful engineers. In fact, less hopeful engineers in the course of a year missed 2.5 days more of work than hopeful engineers. All right, and what is hope? The belief that the future will be better than the present, combined with the belief that you have some power to make it so. That simple belief structure influenced their daily behavior so much so that they were more likely to go to work. We factored out that it cost that one company millions in lost productivity because of less hopeful workers being employed as engineers than hopeful workers. We also found that hope is worth a whole day's worth of productivity. So if you think about a 7-day work week, and God forbid we're all working 7 days, but if you think about a 7-day work week, out of those 7 days, 14%, so 1 day of productivity is lost due to a lack of hope. A lack of hope. 14% of overall productivity each week is attributable to hope. So we've done 50 different studies looking at how hope relates to overall productivity, and we found that it's worth 1 day a week of workplace productivity. Any of you have kids in the audience? Okay. Think about this. Hope is related to academic success at school. So this is something you can take home with you at school. Hope is worth a letter grade of academic success. So hope is worth a full letter grade. So if I divide the room and you guys have high IQ and low hope, and you have high IQ and high hope, you will do a letter grade better than these folks. I'm not singling you out. I don't even know. He was immediately offended. Why did I think I am? So these guys would do a letter grade lower than these guys just because of hope. Just because of hope. Now, how do you get more hope in your life? I'll talk briefly about that. First, you need to future cast. You need to, I'm gonna get a little coffee here. You need to think about the future in a complex way. And what allows you to do that is this part of your brain. So everybody point to right above their left eyebrow, other left. Everybody got it? All right, left eyebrow. That's where hope lives. That's where hope lives. So it's part of your left prefrontal cortex. And it's one of the newest parts of the brain. And it's one of the most complicated parts of the brain. And that's where hopeful thought comes from. It requires lots of different parts of the brain, but ultimately it comes out of that part of the brain. And what that part of the brain does is it allows us to think about the future in a complex way. It allows us to dream. It allows us to dream. So how many of you spend 30 minutes a week thinking about the future in a way that makes your life better? Raise your hand. And so most of the people in the room. So a friend of mine is a CEO at a small company. You might not be able to do this at a larger company, but he has 100 employees. He runs a consulting firm, has 100 employees, and right now in his office, they are spending 30 minutes of dream time. They have assigned dream time every Friday morning, 30 minutes of dream time. What do you get to dream about? You guys are smiling. It's like, that will never work here. What do you dream about? You don't have to dream about something related to work. It's not Google 20%. It's not thinking about another project. It's about anything you want to focus your hope on. And it gives you just 30 minutes every week of dream time. There's also a dream manager. So someone in the office holds you accountable for the dreams that you're pursuing. And what my friend has found, Patrick Allardyce is his name, what he's found is that when people get to work, when they get a nice, good job, they slowly stop thinking about the future in a meaningful way. They start to settle a little bit. And he has said, I don't want my people to settle. So I'm going to give them that 30 minutes a week to futurecast, to dream. And he holds them accountable. And some people just want to have less debt in their life. That's a dream of theirs. Some people, like Patrick, wanted to climb a mountain, which he did as part of his dream. Other people wanted to open a tea shop, which they did as part of their dream. So having 30 minutes, whether it's on company time or your private time, 30 minutes a week just to dream about the future helps you become more hopeful. The second thing is triggering action. When we have something that we want to do, we have to create a win-where plan to make it happen, or it never happens. It never happens. So the research suggests that if for every goal that you're working on, whether it's a work goal or a private goal, if you attach a win-where plan to that goal, it's more likely to happen. So it's just scheduling project management. It's just scheduling the when you're going to work on something and where you'll be when you work on it. The last thing that we're not very good at as humans is planning for ifs, planning for all the obstacles that come about. So planning for the things that step in the way of us getting things done. So we've done this poll across America with students, grades 5 through 12, and we just polled 1 million students in October. So we polled a whole bunch of students. What we know is that humans, based on that poll alone, what we know is that humans, regardless of their age, were very challenged by coming up with alternate pathways to our goals once we're impeded by obstacles. So planning for ifs is a critical way to make hope happen. So here are the things I want to leave you with. What is hope? Hope is the belief that the future will be better than the present, combined with the belief that we have some power to make it so. Number 2, it's a follower's need. Number 3, if you have hope, if your leader gives you hope, you're way more likely to be engaged at work, which is involved in and enthusiastic about work. Number 4, hope accounts for about 14% of workplace productivity. So the more hopeful you are, the more productivity you can have. And the last thing I want you to know is that if you dream a little bit, if you trigger action with a win-where plan, and then if you plan for the ifs of life, then you're much more likely to get from point A to point B in your life than if you don't. That's what I wanted to share with you this morning. I think now we're going to have some special guests come up and ask a few questions. And I think you guys all know Quin and Christophe. You should know them better than I do since they work with you.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Shane. Thank you so much for those amazing words that are not that usual to hear.
Mm-hmm.
And the first time where Jessica said, "Hey, Shane Lopez is coming," I said, "What is she doing? What is he talking about?" And I had a book and a few TED Talks to watch. And I need to say that when I heard what he said, especially when he describes hope with numbers, for someone that is more on the engineering side, it feels like, oh, not only I think I understand what you say, but you also prove it. Hope is something that is intrinsically part of who we want to be. It's not necessarily what we do. The part that I was really intrigued about was when Shane went even beyond what he said today and said that hope can even have an impact on your health. So it's not just productivity, it's more, and I would love to hear a little bit more about that. How do you go from hope to better health?
Yeah. I tell a story in this book I wrote, Making Hope Happen, about another very hopeful person in my life. Her name is Rose Naughton, and she had, at age 5, a heart transplant. And as a result, if you've ever had a friend with a transplant, you take gobs of medication to counteract any side effects and make sure you have no rejection over time. Well, she did exactly that with the help of her parents until she was 13 years old. and then she was walking up a hill and fell. She was out of breath and couldn't go up the hill anymore, and turned out she was rejecting that heart. And she had a second transplant at the age of 13. And at that time, her parents said, you're 13 years old, now you take your medicine on your own. So now you figure out when you need to take your medicine 2 or 3 times a day. And you take care of your health, because we're not always going to be there for you. And she did. She did. So I asked her, I said, Rose, you've taken, and she counted them up. She said like 20,000 doses of this medicine since she was 13. I said, how many have you missed? How many doses have you missed, forgotten to take? She said 2 out of 20,000. I said, how is that? She said, one day, and this is where the hope comes in, one day I want to be a linguist, I want to be married, I want a little house with a picket fence and a puppy. And that image of the future keeps me behaving in my best interest today. That's how hope works. That's how hope works for Rose, but it's also how hope works in our lives. The investment we have, the psychological investment we have in the future makes us behave in our best interest today. And if we are behaving in our best interest today, then we do the things that keep us healthy. We're more likely to go to the doctor. We're more likely to practice safe sex. We're more likely to floss. We're more likely to, you name the preventative thing, we're more likely to do it. We're more likely, people in a housing project are more likely to eat vegetables if they're hopeful than if they're not hopeful. I mean, we've done all these different studies demonstrating these unique effects. But what it is because you psychologically invest in the future, and your present self wants to be good to that future self. And you behave in accordance with what you want for your future self. So that's where health comes in. But there's also, I talked about hope and intelligence. I said, these guys are super smart, not hopeful. These guys are super smart and hopeful. What I want to make clear is that hope has no relationship to intelligence whatsoever. None. So it has a zero correlation with intelligence. It also has a zero correlation with socioeconomic status. So we might think that those folks on this side of the street are hopeful and these folks on this side of the street are less hopeful. But in fact, it has zero correlation with SES.
It's very interesting. But you can see the benefits of being hopeful.
Mm-hmm.
But how can you turn from not as hopeful into hopeful? I mean, what's the quickest way to get started?
The quickest way to get started.
Take action.
Yeah. Well, the quickest way to get started is actually to hang out with the most hopeful person you know.
That would be us.
There you go. There you go. That's the quickest way. So that's the quickest way to get started. So if you want a recipe for hope, one way is to hang out with very hopeful people. The second way is to pursue a goal that you're very, very passionate about. So having one person in your life that's super hopeful that you can spend time with, and also having one goal that you're very excited about pursuing, and pursuing that goal, having those two things, are shortcuts to being more hopeful. You might notice when you hang out with a negative person, you become more negative. When you hang out with a positive person, you also become more positive, but I'll take that a step further. So if I'm hopeful, then I share hope with Jessica. Now, she and I know each other, so that might make sense. But then she shares hope with the guy behind her, who I don't know. There it is.
He needs it.
No, Joe doesn't need it.
Joe gets more hope, and I don't know Joe, but he's been influenced by me being hopeful. And then it goes to another degree to the guy behind Joe, who Joe may not know well, but he has some interaction with. So hope transmits itself to the third degree, to 3 people beyond the instigator of hope. So positive emotions do this, but negative emotions do this as well. So if I'm hopeless and I spread that to Jessica, then she can spread it, hopelessness as well. So hopefulness is spread to the third degree, and that's another shortcut. If we think about leaders, if we think about managers, and how many interactions they have with their employees every day, a manager, and this might be a heavy load for you, but if you think about it, you're responsible for the hope of your employees, but you're also somewhat responsible for the hope of their families, because they go home and spread either the positive or the negative with their family members as well.
Have you seen any organizations that have done this very well, inspiring the hope of individual employee that for the benefit of the company? So you see, create an environment of a lot more hope among your employees.
Yeah. What I've seen, probably the best example I've seen is at Nationwide Insurance. You can do the jingle. You want to do the jingle? Yeah. All right, everybody can do the jingle. I get $5 if you do the jingle. There you go. So Nationwide is on your side, and they're on the side of their employees as well. It's interesting. Their CEO, Steve Rasmussen, is just a really high hope guy. But what he's figured out is that what they are doing as a company, they are selling the future. So an insurance company is selling the future. You're basically saying, you want a better future, insure yourself today. You want a better future, do these things that we suggest today. So he knows his business is about selling hope, so he's become pretty good about talking about the future in a complex way. Prudential is really good at that too, but they don't really do it so much they do it more for their customers than they do it for their employees. So I would say Nationwide is a great example. They're also a good example of a strengths-based organization. Raise your hand if you've ever taken the Strengths Finder. Okay, so Gallup is the originator of the Strengths Finder. So Nationwide, everyone in their leadership group has discovered their strengths, and the more you do what you do best, the more hopeful you are. So with that leadership group, they've also, as I mentioned, did all the strengths work. So they're more hopeful as a leadership group, which permeates the working population as well. So I would say Nationwide is a good example of a larger company. The company I mentioned that Patrick Alderdice runs, Pennington & Company, it's a 100-person shop, but it's a 100-person shop that has pretty deep effects on our community because they are spreading hope to all of their employees, and they do it through that dream time exercise that I mentioned, and having that dream manager, and they really incentivize hopeful thinking. So they do that for their employees, and their employees are much more likely to go out and contribute to the community because of their hopefulness.
Thank you so much for that. I have another question about leadership and hope. And this has to do with how much of driving by example will lead into hope versus talking about hope.
Yeah, 70%. He likes numbers. So, no, 70% of the variability in an employee's hopefulness and engagement is attributable to leadership. So who your boss is matters a ton when it comes to how hopeful you are and how engaged you are. So leading by example, both in terms of our quantifiable studies and our social network studies, is paramount to being hopeful. The question I have for leaders is, where do you get your hope from? Because it's tantamount that you have hope to share with others, but leaders always need a wellspring of hope in their own lives. So that's one thing that comes to mind is we're expecting our leaders to be hopeful so that we can be hopeful. But I always feel for the leader who needs their own dose of hope in their own lives.
So I guess we ought to have a leader somewhere
to
fun to inspire us. Guys, we've been asking a few questions. The idea was to give you a chance to ask questions to Shane. So do you have any questions for him?
We have a very international panel up here today. How does this change with some of the different, areas of the world and cultures?
Yeah, it's a great question. We talked a little bit about this before the session. So Gallup does something called the World Poll, and we go into 162 countries every year, and we ask the same set of questions every year, and we track those results over time. So we've been doing that since 2005. we're in our 10th year of that. That's just a little background to say we've asked questions about optimism. So optimism is half of hope. Optimism is the belief that the future will be better than the present. It's not the take action part, okay? Hope combines optimism with that belief that you have some power to make it so and take action to make it happen. What we know about optimism, number one, two things. Optimism is universal. So it is in every country of the world. But we also know that it varies significantly, not necessarily by the factors you might consider in terms of SES and other factors, but it varies maybe by culture. We haven't really figured that out yet. But we know that countries in the Netherlands are the most optimistic countries, and then sub-Saharan Africa is the least optimistic countries. So we know a little bit about how it varies, but the other important point is that it's universal. Optimism and hope they're everywhere we look, essentially. They might be in different doses and amounts, but hope and optimism are pretty much everywhere we look.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, sometimes things don't get better. Sometimes things are not in your control.
Right.
So kind of how does hope jive with the fact that, maybe, I'm just thinking from my perspective personally, like I'm working for a group that thought the market would always get better and it did the opposite. So like, so it's kind of like, how does that work with hope that things don't always get better and you can't always control it?
Yeah, hopeful people are realists. So hopeful people are the most realistic people I know. So my father-in-law has a saying that I hate. He goes, I'm not an optimist, I'm a realist. And then I just want to punch him in the throat. Because hopeful people are realistic people. So they know the numbers, they know the market, they know what it looks like, yet they press on regardless. And they try to innovate despite that, knowing the reality. So another story, and I tell stories and mix it with data, but a friend of mine owns a brew pub in Lawrence, Kansas, and the brew pub was doing really well, and people kept asking him, can you bottle the beer and sell beer in six-packs? And he goes, well, one day we just don't have the capacity to do that right now. And he finally decided to set up a brewery where he could bottle the beer. So it was a bottling plant and the whole 9 yards. And he shut down on Friday, went home, and he was going to bottle his first six-pack of beer on Monday. And then he got a call on Sunday night that his plant was on fire. So he lost everything in the fire. And he had to make that decision. So in the face of this, do I now go forward and try again? With the help of insurance money, obviously, but in the face of this, do I rebuild or do I just scrap the plants? And what hopeful people do again and again and again is they find another way to a positive future. So they don't do the same thing over and over and over again, which can cause you a lot of headaches. They find another way to a positive future, and they do something that a friend of mine who's actually a physician, he calls re-goaling. So you actually say, okay, are we doing something that's never going to pay off? And if we're doing something that's never going to pay off, should we re-goal and do something else? So think about in your own life, if you played soccer as a kid and decided, okay, I'm never going to be a premier soccer player, then did you switch to another sport or something like that? So we do the same thing in our adult lives. We figure out what is working for us now and what's not working for us now, and come up with a plan B. So that's the long and short answer. Plan B. You see that some of the projects that you're working on don't matter, but aren't being sold in the way you thought they would be. But then you have that plan B product that hopefully will catch the market and take it by storm and grab some attention. So really, it's a flexible way of thinking. It's not a panacea. So I'm not saying be hopeful in spite of the data that you're getting, but when you get the data, how can you be hopeful about something else that might bring you fruit?
Just a point, because you just mentioned about a category you're working on, so it's kind of related to work. So I'll talk a little bit from a work perspective, or my perspective, right? I mean, I'm managing Asia Pacific right now. I mean, if you're talking about headwinds in terms of challenges we face, you can see a lot. The currency is not working, the PC category is declining, and it looks like the future is very doomed if you just look at the macros, right? But there's still a lot of things we can maximize, a lot of things what we do. We can do a lot more within the CCP category. We're working on the new, to drive our growth category. There's a lot of work. I mean, instead of sitting and just hopefully that things will become better, how can you take the matter into your own, to take action into your own hand, try to drive in changes, right? That's what we've been doing over the past 18 months in Asia Pacific. So in the economy, in the current state where we can say, oh no, Bracken, you know, it's really tough, we can't grow, we could have done that. But instead we say, despite of all those negatives, what can we do? I mean, so instead of declining, we are able to grow double digit over the past 6 quarters already. So I think, I mean, it's, when was the lesson to Shane, I think important to distinguish between being hopeful, but really taking the second part of hopeful is taking actions to change what you see is not working.
Yeah, and if you're not taking the actions, you're at best being optimistic and at worst being wishful. And wishful thinking will get you in trouble every time. Wishful thinking in the studies that we've done, looking at wishful thinking versus hopeful thinking, wishful thinking undermines your ability to take action. So if you're passively wishing that something would change, then you're actually much less likely to take any action than if you're being more hopeful. So I know we're splitting hairs a little bit, but there are important differences between wishing and hoping and being optimistic, and being a realist versus being a pessimist. There are important differences there. Yep.
I'm sorry I was late, that I had to be in a meeting in Palo Alto, but I rushed over here to try to hear the end of this. I love this topic, and I love everything about this topic. I hate wishful thinking, and I love practical optimists, or however you describe it. You know, I thought I'd give an example. This is more a comment than a question, but I'd love to hear you comment on it. We picked the two people from our company to sit up there with you, because these guys are really practical optimists or hopeful people. I wanted to give an example outside our company that most people in this room won't have heard before, about what looks like pessimism or cynicism or skepticism. And I think it shows that hope comes in all flavors and circumstances. When I worked at my prior company, the first week I was sent down to Brazil. I was running around meeting with various people in the world, and the Brazil operation was the best operation in the world. They were on fire. They were by far the best in the world. They had 4 consecutive years of just acceleration, culminating in the best year of the entire company history of any region anywhere. And they had what they, I don't know what they called it, I can't remember anymore, but it was basically a meeting to review the last year. And so everybody told me before I went down there how amazing the year they had been. And so I thought, okay, well, this is going to be a rah-rah session and a mutual backslapping. And so when I was in the room with them, and they were all very positive. And the call opened, and it was an hour and a half meeting. And the first hour was all the mistakes they'd made, all the things they'd missed, all the opportunities they hadn't gotten to, if they'd got to them, the year they could have had. And I thought, and that is an incredibly hopeful point of view. That it's not this; it's the flip side of all this. But I'd love to hear your comment on that. Yeah.
Figuring out what's not working for you and being a realist about that is definitely part of hope. The most hopeful people I've ever met are the most realistic people. They know their weakness is cold. They know what they're struggling with cold. They know all the obstacles that that sit before them. And that's what we don't teach in school or at work is really how to deal with obstacles, how to turn obstacles into opportunity. So it's something that our kids struggle with, but it's something that the modern employee struggles with as well. But yeah, they were being realistic. They were just pointing to, here are the goals that we want to achieve, and if we use each of these missed opportunities as pathway to that new point B, then we're potentially able to achieve that new goal.
It's okay, I'll just shout. So, we talked about how to become hopeful and how to be the most hopeful person you know.
Mm-hmm.
And then be setting goals if something doesn't work out. But let's say we manage to become hopeful, how do we become immune? So becoming immune to events not working out as people, and how do we become immune to people around us, whether at work or outside of work and family, who are not hopeful or continuously pessimistic, skeptical.
Yeah.
What's the best way to manage that?
So his question is, how do we deal with emotional vampires? Yeah. Does that sum it up pretty well? Yeah. Frankly, I have this spend strategy that I use at work that I recommend that people use in their own lives. If you have someone who spreads joy and brings something positive into your life, spend as much time as you can with them, face to face. If you have someone that who is an emotional vampire and is taking the positive away from you, send as many emails and text messages as you can to that person. So manage your relationship in a very different way. So who are you going to have lunch with? You're going to have lunch with the person who gives you emotional joy. Who are you going to have coffee with? You're going to, again, have face-to-face time. So it's really managing your time as a resource and managing the relationships. It's part of, you were talking about job crafting. What did you call it? Designing your impact. It's part of designing your impact because you are going to have people around you that are much more pessimistic without a goal of making something better. So a lot of devil's advocates, if you're a devil's advocate out there, bless you. But a lot of people who are devil's advocates want to poo-poo on your ideas, and they don't offer the constructive criticism, the constructive next steps that you need. So I would try that spend strategy, spend as much time as you can, and those people with the people that are emotionally giving to you, and send as much compact communication to the people that aren't in your emotional wheelhouse. That's a very simple strategy. The harder part of it is if you have a disengaged employee who is trying to undermine your work and the work of the people around you, what do you do with that person? So I like having them work from home because they may be productive in some sense, but they're disengaging to the people in the workplace. So if you have flexible work situations where you can have that disengaged employee work from home, their engagement might go up by doing so, and your disengagement will go down. So actually managing individual employees by their level of engagement is an initial strategy you have to try out. Other thoughts?
Yeah, I wanted to comment on one thing, change versus hope. I've seen many times in my life where after changing job, starting a new job, and I will give an example. I'm changing job and starting something new, and for the first few months, the level of energy, the level of passion, the level of everything is so dramatically higher than what happened before. And I didn't know that before. I just felt that I was doing good, I was constructive, I was a good leader, but I didn't even notice that the level of energy, enthusiasm, or hope was different. I only noticed it after I changed. And then I realized how powerful change is. but at the same time, how scary change is. And this balance has been repeating itself time over time. So question for you is, can you comment on this balance between being afraid of changing and the actually positive impact it has on almost everything you do?
Absolutely. Couple of different lines of thinking there. One is that that's an international phenomenon, that love affair that you have with a new job. It happens for everyone in every country. We see it time and time again. My wife just got to her 1-year anniversary at her new job, and she still loves it. So now it's like real love, because the initial love is infatuation, and it's kind of blind love, and that usually wears out about 6 months in. So one of the key things to do in this, design your impact. This goes back to a previous session, but one thing you keep doing is reinventing the job you have. So if you can revisit and reinvent the job you have, so this trip, this quarter, was a different trip than it was last quarter, which will be a different trip from it is a quarter from now, because you will redesign the job you have each quarter, and you'll be a new and different employee. So maybe you can savor, that passion you have for the job and keep that love affair going. But one real important point about hope and fear, I want to talk about that. There's a lot of uncertainty in the world. There's a lot of uncertainty in the workplace. And that uncertainty, that fear kind of commingles with hope. So those two feelings go together. But what we know, what are your two responses when you're fearful? What are the two things that you do? This is basic psychology. Fight or flight. So if you let fear trump hope, you're going to fight or flee. So you're going to wake up in the morning not knowing if you want to punch your boss or run away. Those are going to be the two things that you're going to be thinking about. So hope opens you up to many more opportunities. So when you feel hopeful, and this is again basic psychology, but we didn't test it until like 2000. When you feel hopeful, you actually broaden your perspective on the world. So there are 4 or 5 or 6 things that you're willing and able to go out and do. So it's called this broaden and build theory of positive emotions that's applied to hopeful thinking versus fearful thinking. So you're always going to be balancing certainty with uncertainty. Fear and hope will be commingled, but the extent to which you can have hope trump fear, and the way I would recommend doing that is by reinventing your job every few months. So in other words, try to make it a new relationship, try to reboot that relationship you have with your coworkers, with your projects, with your manager, and try to do that every 3 to 4 months, so that you're feeling like every quarter something has been reinvigorated, and that will help you design your impact. It will help you deal with fear of change and become more hopeful potentially. Question here and question there.
So in regards to the dream time that you spoke of earlier, have you noticed any kind of correlation between hopefulness and creativity?
Yeah, hope and creativity. There's a whole line of study looking at hope and creativity in general, but hope and creativity in the workplace in particular. So what Suzanne Peterson at Arizona State University has looked at is business place problem solving. So she's given people in the workplace actual problems to solve that are specific to their workplace endeavors. And she's found again and again and again that the more hopeful people come up with more solutions and more creative solutions. So the number of solutions goes up, the more creative, the more hopeful you are, and the amount of creativity you have. So that's part of that whole, I think, Jessica, part of that whole broaden and building perspective. So creativity comes out of interest and curiosity and usually a very positive emotional state. Some people are creative when they're in their darkest periods, but most people are creative when they're in their brightest periods. So it comes out of that very positive place. So hope definitely leads to more creative expression in the workplace. So you get more ideas, you get more creative ideas, And she actually did a couple of studies where the ideas were judged for effectiveness, and they were more effective ideas. So they weren't just bold and creative, they were actually quite useful ideas. So tons of research related to hope and creativity.
I was just curious about hope tied to, you said it doesn't make a difference where you are in the world, just status, but what about life stages and life changes?
Yeah, we just did a study looking at hope in across the lifespan, and what we found out is that hope peaks at about your 50s and 60s. So so you still have some time to go. So it looks like it's bimodal. So it looks like hope is high during adolescence, and then it goes down a tad, not a whole bunch if you're not in a hopeless period, but it goes down a tad, and then in your 50s and 60s it goes up a little bit, and then in your 70s and 80s, impending doom, kind of locks in. And what's interesting, it brings up this really interesting phenomenon. We're the only creatures on the planet that are hopeful, and we're the only creatures on the planet that have a real understanding that we will one day die. Think about that. Think about those two together. We are the only creatures on the planet that understand that this experience that we're having is time limited. And I think it puts a pressure on us to be hopeful, to think about the future in a very meaningful way so that we can make the most of our time here. But that's what we've learned so far in that lifespan study. Yep.
You talk about having a clear vision of the future to create hope. Can you describe a little bit also, that vision of the future? How do you build it? Which one is the one that will create the most engagement from people?
Yeah, that's interesting. You guys have any thoughts about that?
I think from a leadership perspective, when I take over a business, the first thing I usually do is really set a vision for my business, right? And then build a strategy and rally my team around it. So we have the same vision, the same goal. And my experience has been, once I've done that, usually get people much more engaged, and employees feel much more, they have a much more clear direction on where they want to go. And usually you create a much more positive environment and people work together. So, and also I walk into a situation where a leader doesn't have a vision, doesn't have a strategy, and you don't get the same kind of feeling. I mean, that's just from my experience.
Mm-hmm. And to build on that, to me, empowerment is another part of what makes this idea of dream and hope more engaged, more personalized. I mean, the vision is very important, but you can't do anything if you don't believe in it, if you're not part of this. Mm-hmm. And the idea of inactive and being inactive in the process of building the future is really important. Mm-hmm. It's one thing to think about something, it's something else to make it happen. To doing for learning, to doing for creating your future. I think in terms of leadership style, I really believe personally in the importance of being totally engaged in the work you do by doing it, not just by thinking about it. How you do that as a team is a really exciting process, but also very challenging. How do you go from saying there is a leader to, hey, we're all at the same level, we're part of it. Mm. We're part of something that will make us better, that will create something that we haven't done before. And to me, there's a blurry line between dream and hope and doing it, enacting on something that we think about. So bringing the activities from the brain to the hand, I think is a big deal. Going into the innovation space and creativity by actually engaging in doing it is a big deal. And that's, I think, as a leader, that's what I'm trying to really bring to the table. How do we go from thinking and hoping into the doing?
Yeah, and part of the vision and part of the doing, you have to see your story overlapping with the story of the leader. So you have to be excited about one part of his vision. And if you can get excited about one part of his vision, then your story overlaps with his story and you guys are working together. If he has this tremendous vision and he's tried to sell you on it 10 times, and you don't see your part of the story in it, then you may never work well with that leader. So part of his job is making the vision specific enough and tailored enough so that you can see how your contributions contribute to making that happen. So a role of a leader is individualizing, it's personalizing, and making sure that you, your hopes are tied to their hopes. But that's also, you know, on a very personal side, just getting to know you as a person. So getting to know why you find your work compelling and interesting, you know, that could tie you to me a little more tightly, and then we can work together on a vision that we both share.
And just to bring it to a little bit lower level, sometimes when I talk to employees is when we set goals and targets, and then every time we engage in a conversation, we're not talking about can we deliver a target, right? And it's how can you stretch yourself, right? And when you stretch yourself, it's not really doing it for the company. And when you stretch yourself, you'll learn a lot. You figure out different way of deliver a better standard, a better quality product, higher sales numbers. So in doing so, you are actually developing yourself. You're growing yourself, right? To help the company deliver the vision. So I think, I mean, as part of the role of a leader, really the ability to inspire the people to go beyond what's asked of them, to do better. As individuals, I think it's the same thing. It's really set a higher goal for yourself. It's really about maximizing your capabilities to deliver something beyond your own capability so you can grow in the process. So don't wait for your leader to tell you, deliver this to me. Deliver more than what I expected to you so it can help you to grow in a career.
I was going to make a comment on that. I was thinking, you know, the only risk in the conversation is if you're sitting in a spot, we've got so many great leaders at Logitech, but if you're sitting in a spot where your leader is either doesn't have experience or isn't creating the vision that overlaps with what you're doing, and you could walk away from this. And I like where Quin was going at the end here. You could walk away from this and say, "Wow, I'm a victim again." You know, and I would say, you know, the thing I love about designing your impact is not only exactly what it teaches, but what it suggests, which is, you know, find instead of waiting for the leader to figure this out or learn it, you know, try to find the overlap, try to create the overlap, so that you really feel inspired by what you're doing. And if it's not working, speak up. You know, tell your leader, anybody and everybody. And so I don't think you're totally a victim in this, no matter what level. You know, one of the reasons I came to Logitech is I don't want to be a company where everybody is looking up, and if the leaders aren't up to the standard, you have a terrible experience. You know, I want to turn this on its head, where you can take control of yourself, take control of your job. Not easy, and not easy. I'm not trying to let the leaders off the hook. I just think it's kind of a two-way street, and if your leader's not getting it done for you, try to find a way to get it done for yourself. Hopefully, sooner or later, we'll all figure that out, and the leader will get better, or you'll be in a different spot or something.
Oh, you'll grow into leaders.
Or you'll grow. Yeah, you'll become a leader.
Yep.
Is it maybe obvious question, but how do you spot hopeful people? How do you know what? And how do you spot hopeful?
How do you spot hopeful people? Well, they come to these sessions. Yeah, they show up. I mean, they show up and they have a goal in mind or a shared goal, and they're excited about it. So, you know, what I find is people who are excited about the future very quickly start telling me what they're excited about. So hopeful people show up, they're not hard to find, and they're excited about the future, and they're often surrounded by other hopeful people. But I look for hopeful people all the time, and it really starts in a conversation, and then they'll say, this is what I'm excited about. And they'll lean forward and they'll tell you exactly what they're excited about. So there's a lot of positive energy in hopeful people, and you know, they certainly make themselves known.
I mean, the way I spot those kind of people is you can see fire in their eyes. And when you interact with them, you can feel the passion. Very directly.
And then they act on it. And then they act on it, and they go beyond it.
And they stretch themselves.
And they stretch themselves, and it's like, it's a package. To me, hope is part of what I see. It's one feature of some people. As an individual, we're more than just hope. Actually, hope is a tool somehow. It's a representation of who we are, but there's also a tool that we're using. But reality is, it's a package. It's in the end to be happy in what you do. And if you're not happy, to get to that point where through the work you do, you get happier. And you really develop this sense of who you are by doing what you do. So the doing, to me, again, is a really big part of that.
Well, I have another question. So I'm in my 50s, so I'm at my peak. And you know, okay, so you got two people there who are super hopeful people. We wouldn't have, Jessica wouldn't have picked them out if they weren't. But I can guarantee you, there's nobody up here who doesn't have moments of gloom and doom. And oh shit, we're in a hole. What do we do? You know, the third time we tried this thing and it's not working.
Yeah.
What, and maybe you've already covered this because I got here late. What are the one or two practical tips you give an individual? Say, God, when I find myself hopeless, not hopeful, what do you do to work out?
Yeah, we talked briefly about that, and that oh shit moment when you realize, for example, I remember doing hope research right before the recession. And then talking to leaders, and I had all these gigs, you know, scheduled like this. We're going to talk about hope. We just lost our entire portfolio, but we're going to talk about hope. So what I learned then, there were leaders who surrounded themselves by other hopeful people, and there were leaders who surrounded themselves by other cynics. And if you're a leader who surrounds yourself by other hopeful people, you're going to make it through that oh shit moment, because you're going to have a partner to rely on. You're going to have a business confidant from some past venture. You're going to have someone you can call to rally you. But then it comes back to that one exciting thing. There's going to be one thing that you see some hope in. Now, there's doom and gloom here, but there's that one thing I can get everybody excited about. I can rally them around this idea. So if you have someone to rally you and you have an idea to rally around, those two things can pull you out of muck and mire.
Any more questions, comments? Great. Thank you so much.